Good afternoon. I can see the energy is still high. That's excellent. I love to see that, and I will draw upon that energy. I want to welcome you this afternoon to our 8th annual Compassion Lecture. It's wonderful to see so many of you, familiar faces and many new faces, faces from this morning and faces who I haven't seen yet. My name is Dr. Robert Roser, and I'm a professor in Health and Human Development in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies. And it's really my great honor to be your MC for this afternoon's Compassion Lecture. We've had quite a day already with our dynamic duo from the left coast, Dr. Dacher Keltner and Dr. Yuria Sheledwen, and we're going to continue the journey into transcendent emotions and prosociality today. Before I introduce our esteemed speaker for this afternoon's lecture, I want to just take a moment, first of all, to thank the Prevention Research Center, who turns 25 today, which is a fantastic milestone in the collective effort and work on behalf of children, schools, families, and communities. I want to thank the director, Max, for hosting this event. I want to thank Carol and Luann and Sarah and her intern Grace for really helping shepherd this event along and to allow us to gather in this beautiful space together. As Yuria suggested to us today, whatever accomplishments we realize in this life, it's always a group effort if you have eyes to see it. I also want to begin by thanking Dr. Mark Greenberg and his wife, Krista Turksma, who so graciously and generously have endowed this lecture series so that we can gather each year together and remember ourselves to our highest values and experience and hear about the cutting edge science on compassion, caring, and kindness. And of course, in addition to Mark, who's here, so I want to thank you. His beautiful wife is not here because they've just become grandparents, so she has other duties she's taking care of. Yay! Yeah. I also want to remember our benefactor, Edna Bennett Pierce, who did so much for the Prevention Research Center and for the compassion chair positions, for the prevention chair, so many things. Her legacy lives on, and we're very grateful, and of course, remember her on this 25th anniversary today. And finally, I just want to thank Yuria again for providing a beautiful workshop this morning and remembering us to our fundamental interdependence and this longing for home. I think these are powerful human, pan-human, maybe even beyond human experiences that unite the sentient beings that populate this beautiful planet. So thank you, Yuria. So one of the things I love about hosting, I'm going to try not to go on, so give me the lamb's hook, Dacher. One of the things I love about hosting the Compassion Lecture each year and the Compassion Workshop as well is I have the opportunity to meet extraordinary people, those who not only espouse the value of the Contemporary Academy in terms of being tremendous thinkers and tremendous producers of knowledge and peer-reviewed papers and funded grants, which is true of our speaker today, but also people who espouse the very values that they preach and research in terms of being kind, benevolent, and altruistic people. In my estimation, our speaker today, as I hope you will clearly see, Dr. Dacher Keltner, is such a person, a gentleman scholar. I have to admit, as I was reviewing his CV and his academic history last night to prepare for this introduction, I had to start practicing sympathetic joy. And so for those of you, it sounds like many of you know, sympathetic joy is defined as taking delight in the good fortune and accomplishments of others, and is seen as an antidote to the afflictive emotion of jealousy. Such is my spiritual development at this juncture. So Dr. Keltner is a distinguished professor of psychology at the University of California, Berkeley, and one of the foremost scientists of emotion in the world. In addition, he's the founding director of the Greater Good Science Center, who I believe many of us have heard, and thank God, I don't know what my syllabus would be for so many courses without the good work of the Greater Good Science Center and that collective, so many people. The mission of that center, as some of you know, is to make the science of a meaningful life accessible to the public. Dacher received his BA in psychology and sociology with honors from the University of Santa Barbara, California, his Ph.D. at Stanford University in social psychology under the direction of Drs. Lee Ross and Phoebe Ellsworth. And then he served as a postdoc for 3 years with Dr. Paul Ekman, another giant in the field of emotion at the University of California, San Francisco. According to Google Scholar, and this is where the sympathetic joy got ramped up last night, Dacher's work has been cited over 90,000 times. He's published somewhere around 190 scientific articles and has won numerous research and teaching awards. I love that he received a mentoring award and a Teacher of the Year award. These are often uncelebrated successes in the academy, so congratulations on that. He's a fellow of the American Psychological Association and the Society for Personality and Social Psychology. He's also written, co-authored several textbooks, and he is a best-selling author. His works include The Power Paradox and Born to Be Good, The Science of a Meaningful Life. And today he'll be talking with us about his most recent book entitled Awe, The New Science of Wonder, Everyday Wonder, and How It Can Transform Your Life. I don't want to go, the other thing I love is he was also the consultant on the Pixar film Inside Out. Pretty cool. And I understand he was the consultant, is this true, on the sequel that's coming out soon. So wow, stay tuned for that. With regard to his scholarship, I need to wrap this up, but Dr. Keltner's research has been groundbreaking in many different ways that have, in my life, reoriented my thinking and the thinking of so many other scholars that are at the core. Reoriented my thinking about phenomena that are at the core of the science of psychology. For instance, he's done work looking back at Darwin's writings regarding the nature of human nature and helped us to understand that, of course, we're self-interested and competitive beings, but that is only half of the story. We are also cooperative, kind, and compassionate beings. And I think that kind of message should be more centered in our psychology. In terms of the psychology of emotion, he's liberated the idea of emotion from the ego-encrusted skull and really seen emotion as relational, as a kind of phenomena that occurs between people and at the interface of the person and the environment, so as to orient our behavior to various opportunities and challenges we face in the context of daily social life. So for instance, he's looked at the emotion of love and desire and looked at how these emotions play the social function of re-engaging and enhancing our commitment to each other. So in a way, he's moved the psychology out of the individual. As he'll talk about today, he's also done work on what I think about as epistemic emotions, which are emotions that occur before conceptual knowledge kicks in. So these are ways of knowing the world that are embodied, that are sensory, that are affective by definition, and that are as important as our discursive reason, our quote unquote top-down processing of the world, and primary to them, and primary in development, and so very important to understand our behavior. And finally, I just want to say he's a very humble person, a person who, as we can see in the greater good, is a person who wants all of this heady and embodied science to move out into the world for the betterment of peoples and planet. And so I think that kind of value and virtue is noteworthy. And so I wanted to note it here. His lecture today is entitled "The Need to Imagine: How Humans Transcend Reality Through Compassion, Awe, and Aesthetics." So please join me in welcoming Dacher Keltner.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you, Mark. Where's Mark, for this chance to come visit? I've been wanting to come for a long time, but things got in the way. Thank you, Penn State. When I started the science of my approach to the science of compassion a couple of decades ago, it was Penn State that was really kind of the leading voice in that science, and the idea that caring and compassion are fundamental to everything that we do. So I pay homage to you and your football team and your wonderful big public university that makes me feel right at home. So it's great to be here. I was lucky enough, my mom taught women's studies and literature, and love Virginia Woolf. And this is, in a way, encapsulates the science that I'm going to talk to you about today. And really, as Rob said, the broader inquiry we're all engaged in of charting our passions. The streets of London have their map, but our passions are uncharted. And that will be a theme of today as we move through. I've retitled the talk, "The Transcendent, Self-Transcendent States." So, hoping this will, let's see. It was working. There we go. Let's see. All right, it's working. All right. Good. So 14 years ago, I got a call from this guy, Pete Dacher, who's a director at Pixar. He had just won the Academy Award for Up, and he called me up and he said, you've been in the science of emotion for 25 years. You teach it at Berkeley. I've been listening to your audio recordings. This was before podcasts, believe it or not. And he said, I'm thinking about doing a movie on emotion, and I'd love to talk to you. And I have to confess that I actually thought he wanted to use my voice as a character in the movie, which was not why I was there. And of course, that conversation led to Inside Out. And I'll tell you, if you're interested, we could talk a little bit about the sequel. But it was interesting. One of the first questions that he asked me is, he said, we've got 5 emotions. You're a scientist. What emotion should you put into the film if we could add one emotion? And I was like, it's got to be compassion or awe. They're fundamental to human nature. I can't imagine life, a neighborhood, a community, a school, a person without compassion, although they certainly almost exist. And so I made the pitch for compassion or awe. And he's like, nah, that just won't work out. And so I lost that argument, regrettably. But the film did open up a lot of eyes to the wonders of emotion that have been opened up through at Penn State. That film really traces back in fundamental ways to where the science of emotion began, which is, as Rob really nicely said, this is Paul Ekman, my postdoctoral advisor, in his 30s, when he ventured to New Guinea on something of a lark and did a lot of research, or some research. Many of you know this is in the textbooks. It's featured in novels. It's prominent in the film, where he documented 6 emotional expressions that the foray of New Guinea would show if you asked them to pose their faces in certain situations that they could recognize in Westerners. It really launched in fundamental ways the science of emotion, with all of its interesting controversies and the like. And that science and those 6 emotions, and Rob got it right. Those are emotions in some sense about fight or flight, right? Anger, fear, disgust, and the ego, self-preservation. Led to interesting debates about how they're different. Is that facial behavior universal and the like? And that was really our picture of emotion up until about 13, 15 years ago, for the most part. And I will argue, as Rob anticipated, a very narrow point of view on the nature of emotion that really has important implications for prevention, healthcare, how we treat people who are struggling in life, what we teach kids in schools. This is a side note, but actually really important. I'm going to just signal it to you. I hope in your own inquiry you look into it. One of the angles that I took to the science, this very narrow view of human emotion, is what we will call what Alan Cowan and I have called a semantic space approach to subjective experiences, any kind of subjective experience, or you might call a computational approach. And what that means is you don't have a priori commitments to 6 emotions. God knows where those 6 emotions came from in Ekman's research. It wasn't Charles Darwin. He hadn't even read Charles Darwin when he went to New Guinea. It was just this arbitrary decision that oriented a field for 30 years. And with this approach, what we do is we rely on, and I'm happy to talk about this in Q&A, we present people thousands of stimuli, not just 6 faces, of every kind of person of different ethnic backgrounds and how they express emotion or play music or paint or what have you. And then we rely on different kinds of statistical techniques to really get at how many emotions are there and what is the structure of our emotional lives or our aesthetic lives or our moral lives with this more broad, open-ended approach to that. And these are complicated. You should go to alancowan.com to really explore this. And what you start to be able to do is map what is the nature of subjective feelings of music in China and the United States. There are about 13 different states. How do we communicate emotion in the voice? 20 or 22 different emotions. How do we communicate emotions in the face? This one is so fun. If I showed this to you right now, we'd be addicted to this. This is 2,100 GIFs represented in a semantic space. Each color refers to a particular experience. And there's awe right next to beauty and calmness and admiration. It really broadens and opens up the field. As Rob said, and this is just a portrayal of one of our studies of facial expressions, well, I'll draw your attention to how much richer our emotional lives are than just those 6 emotions. Emotions like ecstasy, which Dr. Yuri Solidwin studies in her tradition, contentment, a new interest, sympathy, one of the themes today. The space is much richer than those 6 emotions. We have a lot of emotions, as Virginia Woolf said, to chart in our work. The second approach that I took, and this really began as a young scholar and will feature prominently as we think about compassion, awe, gratitude, and aesthetics, is 99% of emotion research is single individuals in a laboratory, right? They're looking at something on a screen, you're measuring their facial behavior. It's kind of absurd when you think about it. Emotion is relational. We are all one emotional organism in some sense. That can be studied now scientifically. And then I, for different reasons, sort of steeped in different literatures, felt emotions are social. Fundamentally, I think William James led us to think they're inside the head. That's partially true, but most of it is relational. It is, and what Dr. Yuri Solidwin writes about, the relationality of the mind. And that's true of our emotions. And so I started to ask questions, and thank you, Rob, for anticipating this. Like, how in the world could you have a caregiving relationship without emotions? How could you form a caregiving relationship with just anger, fear, disgust, sadness, surprise, happiness? You couldn't do it, right? What about pair bonding or friendship? Or I have devoted a lot of my career to hierarchies and the like. And then this second idea, Martha Nussbaum, a philosopher, David Hume, a philosopher, that emotions are about our social moral identities. They really position us in the world and tell us what we really care about. So those are my broader theoretical orientations. Within that complicated space, what I'd like to talk to you about today, compassion is one very important member of this club of emotions, are what we might call self-transcendent emotions. Fascinating that evolution built into us the capacity to leave the ego and self-interest and competitive spirit behind to do things that in some sense are our higher selves. Jenny Steller, a former student in my lab, now Toronto, has a nice review of the self-transcendent emotions. I think if we talked to Dr. Yuri Salidwin, she would even push it further to think about how these emotional states really transport us to different realms of meaning than the self. But in psychological science, they're fundamentally about other people. Big chunks of our brain are thinking about other people's faces and voices and concerns and sufferings and needs. They orient us to the welfare of others. They bind us into relationships. And then they are really about these three emotions I'll profile today: compassion, gratitude, and awe. So why was, when Mark started up the compassion and caring emphasis as a kind of a centerpiece of the work at Penn State, that's actually, and I suspect he got smirks and, certain kinds of resistances here in the academy and outside in the world. It's remarkable how much hostility there is in Western European culture, largely white males, to compassion. It is mind-blowing. When I read Born to Be Good, I dug myself into some of the great thinkers, just like, okay, what do we think about when I feel concern for other people's welfare? Ayn Rand, one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, libertarianism. If any civilization is to survive, it is the morality of altruism that men have to reject. Unbelievable. I was just reading about the decline of Britain in the past 15 years. They rejected caring for others. They're in trouble. Machiavelli, who I have a slight obsession with, of mankind, we may say in general, fickle, hypocritical, greedy of gain. Immanuel Kant had a massive influence on our legal system in Western European traditions, his philosophy of morality, which has very little to say about human emotion. David Hume is a great counterpart. Sympathy, as a good-natured emotion, is always blind and weak. What a biased view of what we now know to be a fundamental emotion. So it's interesting, as Rob nicely noted, I like to look at historical perspectives on emotions, cultural histories of each emotion. And you can trace our thinking of sympathy back thousands of years, the indigenous traditions that Dr. Yuri Salidwin writes about, full of compassion and sympathy. Within evolutionary circles, when Darwin offered his theory of natural selection in the mid-19th century, it really posed this interesting question of like, how do we account for robust human goodness? You read Michael Tomasello, little kids are good. They will share, they will fix things, they will tend to others' needs, as Nancy Eisenberg, one of your speakers, has nicely charted. Alfred Russel Wallace, who was the co-discoverer of a theory of evolution, said sympathy really must be created by God. It just can't be part of our evolutionary story, who we are fundamentally. Thomas Huxley, who was a popularizer of Darwin, came out of the great Huxley family in the UK, called Darwin's Bulldog. He kind of looks like a bulldog. He offered a view that's very common, which is there's no way humans, this is a natural state of our minds, sympathy or compassion. It has to be constructed by culture. We just don't have it in us. And when I read that, that just rubbed me the wrong way when you just think about our capacity for kindness. And also what Rob's been part of, coming out of other cultural traditions, the indigenous traditions, the Buddhist traditions, I remember being on a panel with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and he's like, compassion is the basic state of the mind. And I was just like, what? You know, sort of clouded by this Western view. So it's interesting, a little bit of Darwin scholarship. Darwin, devoted father of 10, rated by historians as one of the kindest, most humble scientists to walk the face of the earth, always self-critical and doubting, had a transformative experience where his beloved daughter, Annie, contracted a lung disease. His wife, Emma, was too overwhelmed by the prospect of watching her die, and Darwin nursed his daughter to her death at age 12. It transformed his understanding of human beings, right? Wow, what do I feel as I watch this sympathy? And Darwin said, sympathy will have increased through natural selection. We so often forget this is Darwin's view. I have to fight this fight all the time. For those communities, like the compassion and care work here in Pennsylvania, which include the greatest number, the most sympathetic members, will flourish and rear the greatest number of offspring. Does that make intuitive sense to you? It's so obvious, but we forgot it for 100 years, right? Sympathy is part of our evolutionary history. It's good for us. Why is that? Well, it's a pretty much in our evolutionary history, take care or die. These are our primate relatives, the little bonobo on the left, the smaller chimpanzee, matrilineal, very cooperative, has sex all the time. People always will come up to me afterwards like, you think I could go back to the bonobo species? And then the chimpanzee on the right. And what you see, these are little infants. They're doing things that are very unusual compared to human infants. Namely, what's unusual about what they're doing? Feeding themselves. Estimates suggest human children don't contribute food or can't provide food till they're about 20 years old. That's actually an estimate. I'm not kidding. You know, who would have an 8-year-old cook for the family? It's like, oh, you know. They're sitting by themselves. They're very independent, obviously. But we forgot this until female primatologists brought us to our attention. We're the most vulnerable mammal on the face of the earth, taking, I would say, 9 or 10 to 50 years to reach the age of independence, right? And that just changed everything. So it became the most fundamental state of human sociality is compassion. I'll give you a couple pieces of data from our lab with a little demonstration. One of the things we do in our lab is we study the sounds of emotion. These are fascinating sounds produced by the most sophisticated communication apparatus in the living universe, which is our vocal apparatus. It takes about 100 muscles to produce a sound. I could go on for this forever. It's remarkable what we can do with the human voice. One of the things we do is we produce these little things called vocal bursts, which are little sounds that communicate emotion. And if you analyze their acoustics, they're shared by mammals, which is interesting, and they predate language. And there's theorizing suggesting language, 200,000 years old, came out of this vocal repertoire. These are the early ways in which we communicated our minds to other fellow beings. So I'm going to test this Penn State audience. I'm going to point to a word, and I want you at the count of 3 to communicate your best sound of that emotion. Let's start with triumph. 1, 2, 3. Very good. I was hearing from Barb about the whiteout and at the football game. Okay, let's go to interest. 1, 2, 3. You guys failed. I said, I'm going to count to 3. But that was good. Okay, let's go to ecstasy. This is always funny. 1, 2, 3. That had some variation there. I heard some woos over here and somebody over here like, oh. All right, and now our emotion of interest, sympathy. Wasn't that beautiful? I'm in a compassion place. I gave a talk at Goldman Sachs. I was like, let's try it. I'm from Berkeley. You should loosen up. Sympathy. 1, 2, 3. Silence. It's like, come on. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. By the way, it's so fascinating. This will be where I end, how culture takes our languages of connection and transcendence. Throughout Bhutan, where I've been many different times, Om Mani Padme Om is carved into the rocks, a sacred sound that a lot of people feel takes the sounds, the mammalian sounds. Other primates communicate sympathy with the voice. Om Mani Padme Om, right? It has those sounds that are built into a sacred phrase like that. So when we present sympathy to people around the world, they know what the emotion is, those little vocalizations. Remote parts of the world, Bhutan, dramatically different parts of the world, it's a universal language of caring and compassion. Fascinating, the brain fires within 30 seconds of hearing distress calls, 30 milliseconds. You don't even know what you've heard, and you're already orienting towards caring when you hear these little vocal bursts of distress and sympathy. In our lab, we show images of profound suffering, children in a famine. And what you see is activation in periaqueductal gray. This is very important because this is a very ancient part of the brain. When you stimulate this in different mammals, they take care of anything around them. A lamb will take care of a chicken. It is the caregiving center of the brain. Compassion is not recent to evolution. It's old. It's down in the midbrain regions where we control basic bodily functions. And then when we get people to feel compassion, everybody take a nice deep breath in. Yuria did this with us earlier today. Take a nice deep exhalation out. One more. Deep breath out. How do you feel at the end of that exhalation? What's it feel like? Who's got a word? Open. Feels calmer. When we exhale, it activates the vagus nerve, the largest bundle of nerves in your body, which helps you vocalize, helps you make eye contact, slows your heart rate, affects digestive organs. Thought early in thinking about the neurophysiology of our bodies as a caregiving branch to our nervous system, the antithesis of fight or flight. And lo and behold, when we get Berkeley students to feel compassion, they show elevated vagus nerve activation. Our bodies are wired to care. Vagal tone, happy to talk about it in Q&A, really important as a metric of how well somebody's doing, right? If you have elevated vagal tone, you handle trauma better, stress better, challenges in an economic context, compassion boosts vagal tone, really profound. And then there are a lot of important work coming, just hearing about it here at Penn State. Out of this basic science, we know compassion is good for your physical health. It helps lead to altruistic behavior sharing. It's a great thing to practice in clinical contexts, as you all are learning. A basic state of transcendence. Next stop, and I'm moving quickly, just because we can open it up in the Q&A, is gratitude, the feeling of reverence for things that are given to you. Adam Smith, the great economist, before he wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, he doesn't get credit for this. Oh, it's all free markets and the like. It's like, no. What also binds people in communities together is gratitude, in the sense of the beneficent virtues that make us good to other people. They are a counterpoint to rapid or rampant self-interest. We know gratitude is just a moral emotion. It helps us appreciate other people. It is, once you deepen it, as Dr. Yuria Selidwin did today in our practices, she used the word reverence. Reverence comes out of the great indigenous traditions that Yuria writes about. Confucianism, at its core, is about reverence for humanity in the principle of Jen or Ren. Paul Woodruff has a nice book also writing about reverence. And so it's this foundational transcendent emotion where we move out of our own self-interest to revere the interests of others in our social exchanges. Getting a feel for, and Yuria writes about kin relationality. We share so much that's fundamental about life with all living forms. There's a lot of interesting science going on right now about how trees take care of other species of trees through their signaling behavior. And from my own tradition, I love to see these moral emotions and moral sentiments registered in other species that we used to dismiss or to look upon contemptuously. Frans de Waal, who really, if you're interested in this kind of thinking, is a must-read. His book, Good Natured, changed my life. He observed something really interesting about the chimpanzees that he spent his early part of the career studying. Chimpanzees, as you probably know, spend 8 to 10% of their waking hours grooming each other, touching each other. They just systematically groom and touch. And he really felt that it was part of the bonding experience. And I'll talk about that in just a second. And then he made this amazing observation that really what primates do is they will trade a very important resource, food, for grooming. Food keeps them alive. How do I reward someone who's given me food and my life? I reward them with patterns of touch, right? You start touching someone when they are sharing food. So I'm going to put you through your second test of compassion and caring. You don't have to groom each other as you eat, I promise. And I used to teach, chimps also rump present a lot to get groomed. I won't have you rump present. But we are going to see how good you are. This just tells us food sharing is fundamental in our social lives. There are current estimates that Americans, like myself, and I do this, eat 50% of their meals alone. That is a great deviation from what we should be doing. Sometimes I'm eating like, okay, I'll eat my burrito, walking across campus, on the cell phone, talking to my mom. What am I doing? That's ridiculous. But there's a wonderful whole anthropology of the foundational nature of food and sharing of food. Food scarcity is real in our evolutionary history. 1 in 7 Americans feels hungry, right? It's foundational to our morality. So we're gonna, before I give you this test, and forgive me, but this is where science really changes our understanding of things. This is amazing to me. So important is touch to caring and compassion and attachment and the sense of safety and our sense of morality, that we have evolved, and they're working out the DNA of what gave rise. Our hand is unlike any hand. It is a spectacular tool-creating communication system with remarkable structures to it. When you touch somebody, you hit the billions of layers of cells in your skin, including immune cells that send signals to your brain, the somatosensory cortex, so you know what kind of touch it is. That's remarkable. And now, in the last 2 or 3 years, they're working out these particular kinds of cells, C afferent cells, and they're largely distributed on the back of your neck and the back of your arms, where we love to be groomed. And when our little children, when we're singing to them to go to sleep, you rub them back there, right? There are special cells that are in your skin in those regions of the body that go straight to the oxytocin networks of your brain and your body, activate the release of oxytocin, and then you suddenly feel like you're merging with somebody, right? Remarkable evolutionary story. This is Alex Gray, who loves just this kind of touch and so forth. It's this is when you touch the cells, this is what it feels like. Okay, so now I'm going to test this caring and compassionate audience, and then we'll show you the data on this. Here are 3 emotions: love, gratitude, and sympathy. And what I want you to do is just turn to somebody next to you. One of you, this is very complicated terminology, will be the toucher. And the other person will be the touchee. The touchee has to stick their arm out, close your eyes, and the toucher is going to reach out and try to communicate these different emotions one at a time in a random order, and the touchy has to guess what emotion just happened by that touch to the arm. Does that make sense to you guys? Go! All right. All right. All right. Okay. You're having too much fun. How many of you got one right? 2, 3. All right. Way above chance. So we've replicated this in different parts of the world. This is chance guessing in this study was 12%. And what you see, people are 4 times the rate of chance in picking up compassion, gratitude, and love. Just a little second. In the study, you had to stick your arm through a barrier. There was a stranger over there. You don't see them. You didn't know other vocal communication. I know, kind of a weird paradigm. Welcome to my lab. Yeah, I know. And but they did really well, which is really remarkable. There were 2 gender differences that break my heart that we replicated. When the woman tried to communicate anger to a male arm, he had no idea what she was doing and did not get it right. And then when the man tried to communicate compassion to the female arm, it didn't go too well. She was like, I don't know what that was. That a robot or what was that? So, but you guys could figure that one out at the Center for Caring and Compassion. That's that. All right. So 15 minutes on awe, and then I'll close it up for Q&A for 15, 20 minutes. So this is a remarkable space of emotion and Rob got it right. You know, we were locked in this mindset of, oh, well, what's emotion? It's all about self-preservation. It's about defense and keeping away from dangerous microbes and, you know, fight or flight stuff. That's what human nature is. And what a narrow view of, you know, in some sense, a Western European. Rob was referring to original sin in an earlier conversation today. We just didn't study these things, even though they're foundational. And so about 15 years ago, or really 20 years ago, John Haidt and I wrote a paper on awe. And then 10 or 15 years ago, we started to do the science of awe. And you'll see the clinical, practical relevance of this right away. It's robust and important. Awe is an emotion you feel when you're in the presence of something vast that transcends your understanding of the world. There's forms of small awe. You know, you can look into a cell and go, whoa, it's a whole society. That's not vast and technically, but probably vast conceptually. So it's really your feeling and emotion when you encounter vast mysteries. Albert Einstein, the most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. It's the fundamental emotion. It's a basic state of mind. Rachel Carson, the great environmentalist, one of the pioneers, we need to teach our children a sense of wonder that is an unfailing antidote to the alienation from the sources that are our strengths. There's something about awe that really tells you, this is my strength in this world, which is interesting for us all to think about. Darwin, and in fact, when I wrote the book, you look at a lot of the great creative contributions in the world, Rachel Carson and Virginia Woolf and Toni Morrison and Darwin and Einstein and Newton and Descartes when they discovered rainbows and it led them to color theory. He was just blown away. He just it was his defining emotion of The forest was a temple filled with the varied productions of the God or nature, in the early 1800s, grappling with nature and how did it come to be so extraordinary, and awe really drove his innovations. So in our work, and this has practical relevance, and I could, because this is a compassion community, I want to talk about compassion. We've gathered stories of awe, humbled by the limits of self-report scales. We just ask people to write about awe from 26 countries, from Mexico to India to Poland to New Zealand to the United States. Spent a long time classifying those, and we have 8 wonders that can bring us awe: spirituality, moral beauty, the visual world, big ideas, nature, music. I was talking to Barb last night about the whiteout at a Penn State football game. Sports and collective movement, right? We walked with Yuria this morning in a circle. Walking meditation start to bring you awe because you are collective. What a rich realm of experience. I always get questioned, what about food? I'm like, sorry, it doesn't make a list. And they're like, you dumb scientist, So anyway, yeah, and I know some of you are out there, you have your own version, but this is it. There's more. It always changes. This is a good start. If we can figure out how to bring more of this into our lives, we're doing pretty well. So what we know is brief experiences of awe make us less entitled. You feel like you have stronger connections to the community. And then what Yuria Salidwin writes about, you start to feel ecological belonging. I'm part of the natural world. I am the natural world. More humility, less ideological polarization. Replicated. I didn't think we'd get that. You get people on opposite sides of the police enforcement debate. They feel awe and they see more common ground in their views, right? So good news from brief experiences of awe. Good news physically, it elevates activation of the vagus nerve, which I talked about. It reduces inflammation, which a lot of you here are working on, that product of your cytokine system that heats up the body, that when chronically activated is very bad for your body. Awe, so far, is the only positive emotion that reduces inflammation. That's amazing. And getting out for a walk on the campus, looking at the sky, listening to music, deactivates inflammation. That's very good news in terms of awe's benefits. All right. Awe has a remarkable evolutionary story. This blows my mind. Jane Goodall, when chimpanzees when they encounter vast experiences in nature, winds, storms, waterfalls, thunder, lightning, they start to do rocking motions, they piloerect, they fluff up their fur, they start to do ritualistic things with objects around them like we do when we feel awe. We have this urge to hold something from a sacred experience, which people do around the world. And Jane Goodall said, I couldn't help feeling that this waterfall display or dance is triggered by feelings of wonder and awe we feel. Why wouldn't they also have some kinds of feelings of spirituality, which is being amazed at things outside of yourself? Yuria earlier talked about how science puts humans in a different category so often. This is a radical position by Jane Goodall, controversial in the study of primates, that they have awe, wonder, and spirituality too. I'm going to move quickly. Awe becomes religious, largely in the written traditions, and then becomes secularized through the Age of Enlightenment and Ralph Waldo Emerson. But I'll pick this up in my closing thoughts on aesthetics and culture. So we've done a lot of research, dozens of studies of awe. It's for, if there are young scientists out there, and this will give you a feel of how you can cultivate it. It's actually an easy emotion to study. People thought, oh, you can't study awe. It's part of it's once in a lifetime. It's a rare thing. Actually, it's all around us, right? So I'll give you a couple of the highlights. First study of all, Lonnie Shioda. We brought undergrads next to this giant T-Rex replica or skeleton of a T-Rex replica in our museum. I love dinosaurs. There's a whole dinosaur club that I want to be part of. You know, it felt, when I heard about dinosaurs when I was 4, I was like, that's it. That's all I want to do. I got second place in the cake baking contest in 1st grade with my T-Rex cake. But they're awesome. They're incredible. So we brought those are my 2 daughters, when they used to feel awe towards their dad, no longer anymore. And sure enough, you feel awe around this T-Rex, and you're either standing near the T-Rex feeling its awesome presence, or you're in the same place and you're looking down this really sterile laboratory hallway, and you just have people say, like, all right, this is a classic measure of identity. I am fill in the blank. And typically a Western European or somebody in the West would be like, I am a Penn State student. I am a psychology major. I am a Democrat or Republican. I am in this sorority or fraternity. But when you're feeling awe, you get really collective. Your self expands, right? I am a human. I'm a natural being. I'm a part of the dust of the Big Bang Theory or whatever. I'm a piece of data. They get expansive, right? And they are in some ways. So more communal self. We did a Ralph Waldo Emerson study. This is one of my favorite awe studies by the very creative Paul Piff. Emerson really got us to reorient to nature. It's so interesting. Indigenous cultures, urea, ecological belonging. I am nature. We lost that idea in Western European history. And when you read about Western European history, we started to be frightened by nature. It didn't go out until a couple people ascended Mont Blanc in the 18th century. Emerson promoted that. And this was one of his big awe experiences. In the woods, we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life. No disgrace, no calamity that nature cannot repair. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes, right? I'm sure most of you have felt repaired by nature. Ming Kuo has a great review out, 2015, 21 pathways by which nature heals us, all the way down to the scents that you smell activate the vagus nerve. The sounds of water are healing. At Berkeley, we had people, we took them out, they looked up into this big grove of eucalyptus trees for 1 minute, or standing in the same place, they looked up at a less awe-inspiring science building, and then we gathered some data from them. Our young people felt less self-important, less entitled around the trees. We needed less money to pay them for the study. They're like, I don't believe in capitalism anymore. Yeah. And then, like all good social psychology, we had a little drama. This guy walked by as they're filling out the questionnaires, who's part of our study, fell and dropped all these pens. And our people, feeling the awe of nature, picked up more pens, right? They helped out more. We did a study with veterans, 1 half-day rafting, 32% drop in PTSD symptoms, right? Awe is powerful. I'm really interested. This astounds me. Our most common source of awe around the world, it's not religion, it's not nature, it's the moral beauty of other people. This one really caught me off guard. This is why we want to go to other cultures, right? We are moved to chills, to tears, to transcendence, just by being around somebody who inspires us. Who's got an example they would share? A personal example. Being moved by somebody's kindness, protesting injustice. Who's got one that's just like, wow. Yeah, Rena. Yeah. Nice. Empowering, right? Stories of moral beauty. It's so fascinating. These fundamental acts of compassion and kindness and altruism of caring and sharing and courage and protesting injustice, overcoming poverty or disease. The medical doctors I work with, you get them telling stories of moral beauty, it goes straight to the 10-year-old who has cancer and how strong and grateful they are for life. And they're just like, they are constantly around our strength and resilience. Kelly talked about the resilience of African-American communities, the joy, the play, the music, right? Despite historic racism. Wow, that is overwhelming. We have this deep tendency to be overwhelmed by moral beauty, and it produces this amazing process of chills and tears and vagal tone, oxytocin release. We share more, and we have this urge to be better, right? 40% of American young people, youth, do not feel like they have a role model today. They can't name one, right? That's bad news. If our young people don't have a person of moral beauty, we got to bring it back into our discourse and our education and everywhere. We live, the complement is moral ugliness, and there's too much moral ugliness in our public sphere. Our culture is going down because of that. And it's not because of human nature, it's because of social media and all kinds of processes. All right, so I want to end on, if I could have 7 or 8 more minutes. Okay, on the imagination, from experiences to acts of culture, creativity, and everything that's human. And this is coming out of a recent paper that I hope will get out sometime. This is fascinating. The world, and forgive my cultural bias in this one, the world, they survey people like, what's most important for kids to learn? And here are 11 values that are important for humans. And one of them is the imagination, and it ranks last worldwide. I think that's a disaster. I think that's why we can't get out of what Rob pointed to, of like this cycle we're in, of polarization and racism and greed and et cetera. And so I think we need to bring the imagination back to our education, our science, our contemplative practice, our care. Arts programs, music programs in the US are being cut. I could go on. It's a real trouble. I won't bore you with this. What this tells us, this is a recent paper, is culture and relationships influence emotions. They shape them fundamentally. If you are from, as Yuria has authored, an indigenous culture, your experience of compassion will really be different. It'll be for other species. They won't even classify them as other species. It'll have a different structure to it. But just as interestingly, you can go from this stuff that evolution gave us of the vocal bursts and the thought patterns and the physiology and experience and build up to culture that through acts of the imagination, through sharing and creating and symbolic processes like painting or music or language, right? We create out of the passions that were given to us. And there's a lot of incredible work now, on the structure of music around the world. Lullabies around the world sound the same, right? You can be singing in any language with any tonality, and it sounds the same. It has this structure to it of calm, safety, dreamlike imagination. So I'll give you some examples. It's fascinating. Yuri and I went to the great anthropology museum in Mexico City with some of the greatest sculptural traditions in history. This is a Mayan portrayal of awe that predates the contact with Europeans, the Spanish in this case, a rich language of communication in sculpture through portraying these transcendent emotions, to share them in the communities, right? To know what awe is, to feel it, to see it in other people, to become wise with awe. And we did a paper actually where we analyzed, can Westerners identify the emotions in pre-Columbian art? Of course they can. They know this is about a spiritual experience and that. The Natya Shastra is this incredible Hindu text that's 2,000 years old that takes how we embody emotion, translates it to dance techniques. This is compassion, which has the head tilt in the eyebrows of, I can tell you the action units, 1 + 4 there, of compassion. And people in the West with no history of this, they see that, and oh, that's sort of an expression of compassion, right? We have these languages through art that we learn how to be compassionate and caregiving. Obviously, there's awe-based design around the world. We need more awe-based design everywhere. We've lost it. These are just some examples. Ernst Haeckel made a lot of discoveries about the evolution of sea life forms in scientific papers, but it was really his drawings that changed the world and led to Art Nouveau and just through awe-based design. This is anybody know where that is? It's Barcelona. It's Gaudi's great Sagrada Familia. He was a mystic that was really interested in awe-based design. And one of my favorites is the principle of wabi-sabi in Japan, where it's about the life cycle, that all design forms go through a process, as Rob would tell you, of birth, growth, decay, death, and recycling. And you see it in their cemeteries. Yuria has written about how the ethics of belonging come out of these experiences of gratitude and bliss and ecstasy and transcendence, that out of experiences, we develop our higher order ethical principles that we would codify in texts and laws and so forth. That's a radical idea in the world of ethics and morality. I would really recommend that. And this is a Rishkara painting of transcendence. So it goes in both ways. So to close, why do I do this science? Rob nailed it. It's interesting. Yankelevich, who's a sociologist, observed we have been living in 30 to 40 to 50 years of what he called, and I think he really got it right, self-expressive individualism, right? And I grew up, I'm kind of the wild child of that. I'm happy to talk about that, just all the revolutions of the 60s and 70s and the transformations. A lot of it was good news. Expanding ideas of rights and freedoms. It's much more pluralistic now. The conversations you'll hear today are really different than the 50s in terms of identities and morals and spirituality and the like. And then, the minute you go to many parts of the world, you'll realize markets, real free markets, help people. They help women in many parts of the world if they're free. So that's good, but we've lost a lot that you are all grappling with. Connectivity, more material, this is unprecedented. Narcissism, one of you used, and greed. And this era really had a companion in science, which is best exemplified by this radical book, The Selfish Gene. The Selfish Gene got a lot of the science right on genetics and was really important. Sold millions of copies, changed science. I think it's one of the most influential nonfiction books written in 30 or 40 years, Richard Dawkins. But this was his view of human beings. We are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes. This is a truth which still fills me with astonishment. And if you read The Selfish Gene, it's all violent competition and the like. And he got some of it right, a lot of it wrong, as he will admit now. There are genes for cooperation and the like. And so in this kind of apex of expressive self-expressive individualism, where we are is the mental health crisis. And this is from a Lancet paper, rises in depression. Depression is just any way you look at the data, it's higher, anxiety is higher, suicide's higher, self-harm is higher, and this is the redder countries are doing much worse, orange, 25 to 30% rise. And in particular, as you know, with young people, it's just, I was a skeptic and it's unprecedented. And I think our science, this is from a paper of 2014, how dopamine reward circuitry is activated by compassion and altruism and the like, how oxytocin helps with empathy, closeness, and trust. We're wired to transcend self-expressive individualism. It's in our nature, and we need more of it. There's so much reason to be hopeful. Our Surgeon General is very interested in what we do, and he's tracking it. Mindfulness now is a pillar of what federal judges learn. I was astonished. I think there are 4 pillars of their education. Mindfulness is one. There are compassion chairs. They're at top universities like Penn State. 3 compassion chairs. Man, if you would have said that 20 years ago, people would be like, I don't even want to say what they would say to you. You know, there are compassion schools, empathetic museums. There's the greening of cities. We just got a bunch. There's a whole new movement on cities of awe, which will be really fun. And indeed, the next Inside Out 2, has some new emotions in there. There they are. And it has a very compassionate take on what it's like to be a teen that I think will be really good for our culture. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you, Greater Good Science Center, for a bunch of collaborators. Check out Alan Cowan if you want the computational book. I do have a new book out. And thanks so much for your attention and your time. So Rob said we've got 15 minutes of whatever. Time for questions, so please. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you know, and first of all, I'd read Dr. Yuri Selidwin's paper in Lancet, which is spirit medicines, what many in the West would call psychedelics. I call them spirit medicines now after reading the paper. She charts the risks and perils and abuses and how to do it right. And I think that, you know, it's been interesting, you know, when you do awe, like I just see somebody, like the minute I use the word awe, like his hand goes up and I'm like, I know you're gonna ask about psychedelics. So yeah, the substances, you know, the chemical compounds that are being approved by the FDA. And the good news is they're proving to be good or helpful for people with really hard struggles, like addiction, which is a tough one, major episodes of depression, although I think the findings are contested and we'll see how that sorts out. But there are 2 worries. And, you know, one is the broad, thoughtless use of them, which is what's happened. Tens of millions of people, use is up 50%. And what will that produce? And usually the opening of substances does not lead to good news, right? Alcohol, marijuana are example, heroin too. They legalized heroin in the Netherlands, I think in the 60s, and it led to increased addiction. So I am worried. And then the data suggests that, yeah, the data on microdosing is not, it's worrisome. And I think in 10 years, it'll be trouble, right? Because people are like, oh, I microdosed before your class. And I'm like, then you're not in my class, you know? And I think it's really worrisome. And then Yuri's made the point, I think the awe literature makes the point that you had, which is there are so many pathways to transcendence. You know, you listen to a piece of music that hits you right. That's profound. You develop a meditative practice, that's profound. You go out and dance with other people or practice rituals together or cheer at a football game. That's big, right? And we have to return to those roots. So I think the risks are real and we've got to be more cautious. That's my take on that literature. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk. Really appreciate the attention you gave. I've had some conversations with my wife about awe as probably our guiding orientation with travel.
Yeah.
Seeking what I'm really intrigued by, and I've been really enjoyed your talk, you talk about the transformative effect of awe and how it can put us in a different state where we're receptive to compassion.
Yeah.
We feel
Yeah.
smaller and we are aware of those outside of ourselves. I'm curious if you have thoughts or knowledge about that timescale of that
Yeah.
change
Yeah.
and what we can do that sustains it.
Yeah.
Or you come home from a vacation, how long do you have that?
Email. Yeah. Yeah.
But also there are moments and there are bigger experiences of experience.
Yeah. Well, that, you know, and this is a question that a lot of care organizations are thinking about. You know, we have a collaboration. So we don't know. The veterans awe experience, half a day on the river, a week later, 32% drop in PTSD. That's pretty good. There are data, if you go to a festival, but there are drug issues there, you have a year-long rise in altruism. And it's just outside of that, we don't know. It's a big question. And you know, organizations like we work with Carnegie Hall, they bring music to the, you know, to organize people who wouldn't ordinarily get to hear Carnegie Hall stuff. Does it benefit people? How long? We don't know. And then, but the low-hanging fruit here is all of our work on mindfulness, breathing, compassion, gratitude. It's moving towards awe, right? Or some of, and Yuri is developing stuff like that. Like, how do I find, you know, depth and meaning in it, listening to a piece of music intentionally? Make that a practice. Or going to a museum. You know, we're working with some museums. Or looking out at nature and doing slow looking, right? And I think that's going to be coming, and that will be the answer to sustaining. And you know, I'm really excited about it. I think it gets us to things like music that we forgot is one of the sources of the best things that we do. So, an important question. Yes, Eddie Marie.
Along those lines, it seems like we're having right moral exemplars.
Yeah.
And also this wanting to go and how to translate that for what allows us to feel that or experience that or with others, we're not making others.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you know, putting the two questions together, there's really neat work now on moral beauty at Lewis and Clark, Diesner, and Hohner, I think. You know, once a day, they get young people to just think about someone who inspires them. That's it, you know, and it quickly moves away from Mother Teresa, Kim Kardashian, you know, LeBron James or whatever. And it gets to, you know, oh yeah, that's right, my roommate. Like, look what they did the other night. It's all around us, right? And so one of the important discoveries in the awe research, accidental, was it's frequent. And we need the words and the lenses to say, oh yeah, this is awesome. You know, we find 2 to 3 times a week, people are feeling pretty serious awe, and they just hadn't named it as such. And moral beauty is part of that. There are people who feel awe 10 times a day. They're hard to live with. They don't do the dishes, you know, and they're just like, ah, you know. But, you know, but it's there to cultivate. And to your questions, like, you know, like this Lewis and Clark research team, let's just ask young people to think once a day, instead of griping about, you know, it's like, all right, man, what was inspiring around here this day? And they'll come up with something, and that boosts well-being. It's a buffer against depression. So I think the everydayness is really important to this conversation, and I hope you remember that. Kelly.
Self-motivating things that you do in the life.
Yeah.
And in my article, I think a lot about consideration and how that the opposite end of that, that ability to like
That's nice.
think about,
Yeah.
where in your work is consideration showing up and how
That's a really wonderful word to kind of think about as a next move in this well-being space is, and how often it's demeaned when you think about it, like a lot of these pro-social constructs, always, she's considerate. It's like you immediately like, oh, not assertive, et cetera. I think it's a profound idea that you're offering. I would link it. There's a new literature on humility. And then if you do the kind of work that I do, which is really to look at the behavior, you'll find they're considerate, right? We have one paper, it's really neat, of awe, and I would frame it as considerate, which is we brought students to the lab, they're talking to another student, and they felt awe, and then they had this conversation, and we said, as this part of this conversation, we want you to talk about your strengths and weaknesses. And what you found is the person feeling awe wasn't taking too long about their strengths, like our narcissistic young people sometimes do. My 12th key strength, and they were more modest and considerate about their presentation and listen more to the other person. They were considerate. So I think it's a good one to, I would look to the humility literature, and then to me, considerate has a nice kind of social expression quality to it that we need. Yeah, Pat. Yeah.
And I was wondering, you think that there's a difference between something like that and, I don't know if it's the right word, like negative awe?
Yeah. Yeah.
You think there's a difference? You think it's just awe in general? And you think that if there's a difference, some of the findings of people experiencing awe, do you think those findings would hold if it was like a more negative?
Yeah. Yeah, terrific question. Took us 8 years to figure that one out. So thank you that you summed it up in a half minute. Yeah, and we talked about this earlier, the etymology of the word awe is fear and dread in the English language. So it goes back to Old Norse and Old English from the 8th and 9th centuries. And we find about a quarter of experiences around the world have a lot of fear in it. And that varies culturally. Cultures that are more hierarchical, more fear-based awe. This is really interesting. Economic inequality pumps fear into experiences of awe, which is interesting. And then, to your question, nice paper by Amy Gordon. If I feel fear-based awe, it's threatening. I feel like God's going to send me to hell, or the person I admire really is going to judge me harshly, right? Or the dread of climate disasters, which is real now. The awe experience is really different. It doesn't have vagal tone, elevation. It feels more threatening, doesn't lift up your well-being, feels more threatening. And so that accounts for a lot of variation. But importantly, it's about a quarter of our experiences of awe. And it changes it dramatically as you anticipated. Yeah.
And it may have been completely inaccurate.
In the hands of Mel Gibson, that's a good bet. Yeah.
But in that particular case, there was fear associated with
Yeah. 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 And I wouldn't trust that as a reliable source of anything. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, we produced at the Greater Good Science Center a course for teaching awe to kids. And it comes, Rachel Carson has this amazing essay, Teach Your Child to Wonder. It's one of my favorite. Rachel Carson is incredible. She fills me with tears, radical journalist, really alerted 1950s America to the dangers of pesticides, impoverished, cancer-stricken, raised her nephew because her sister died of cancer. And raising the nephew, she's like, I got to teach this guy to wonder. And she has these great basic tips in the essay about teaching children to wonder, of like taking time and pausing and going into mystery. Go out into a rainstorm and see what it feels like. Listen to the thunder, get dirty, and then perceptual approaches of like, ask, beautiful, when you hear a bird call, don't label it like I did for 20 years with my daughters. I think that's the robin, or it might be there, and it's like, you're killing my experience. It's like, imagine like, where did that come from? And where is that in this big symphony of sound you're hearing? So a conceptual reorientation, we can do it. It's not that hard, and we have a course for that kind of builds on those. How do you teach children just to get back to the awe? And we know it'll reduce the anxiety and depression of our times. So
I think we're out of time. So I want to thank our lecturer for this year. I want to present you with a crystal for coming, and thank you.
thank you.